I'm Alex Haugland.
And I'm Amy Haugland.
And this is our 1955 Austin Healey 100S.
Welcome to Everyday to Exotic.
My arms are aching, my heart is full of pain. My liver starts to quiver every time I hear your name. Oh, what a feeling, baby. Oh, what a feeling, baby.
The Donald Healey Motor Company was founded by Donald Healey in 1945 to build high-performance automobiles. The first cars used a 2.4-liter engine and mechanical sourced from Riley, another British manufacturer, fitted to a Healey-designed chassis with independent front suspension, coupled with a wind tunnel-tested aerodynamic body to make what Healey claimed was the fastest production closed car in the world.
That basic design was improved over the next few years until, in December 1949, Donald Healey was sailing aboard the RMS Queen Elizabeth to go to a meeting with the intent to see if he could convince General Motors to allow him to use the Cadillac 331 cubic inch V8 engine for a car. On board the cruise liner, he met George W. Mason, who was the president of Nash Kelvinator. They struck up a conversation. George told Donald Healey that if GM turned him down, then he should contact George Mason. And as a result, the Nash Healey line of cars was born. Premiering 2 years before the Corvette, the Nash Healey was the first European-style sports car from an American manufacturer.
The deal worked well for Donald Healey, paying off his debts in exchange for produced cars and helped establish his name in the American market. It also met what the British government wanted in pushing production to export markets to bring in foreign currency in the wake of World War II. The downside of the early Healey cars, as well as the Nash Healey, however, was that they were quite expensive, and with high taxation on personal cars following the war, it limited sales in the United Kingdom.
In pursuit of a more affordable sports car, Donald Healey, along with his son and engineer, Jeffrey Healey, designed a new two-seat sports car based on Austin components, which became the Healey 100. The goal was to place it in the gap of pricing between the low-cost MGs and the more expensive Jaguars.
Premiering the car at the 1952 Earl's Court Motor Show, it caught the attention of Sir Leonard Lord, the head of Austin. The car impressed him enough that he offered to make the cars in his own factories, paying a royalty to Donald Healey and marketing the car as the Austin Healey 100.
Perhaps one of the main reasons that Sir Leonard Lord was interested in the car was due to it being based on the Austin A90 Atlantic mechanicals. The A90 was a car that Austin developed and premiered in 1948, specifically with the intent of marketing it to the Americans. But sales of the rather oddly styled car were pretty dismal, with only 350 sold to the United States of the 3,597 produced. As a result, Austin had a lot of spare parts and no demand for the car, making building the far more saleable Austin Healey 100 an ideal solution for the company.
With the commercial success of the Austin Healey 100, Donald Healey turned to building competition variants of the car. The 100S began as a works development special test car, one of which ran and won its class at the 12 Hours of Sebring race, after which the S was added to the model designation. In all, 50 original 100S specification cars were built by the Donald Healey Motor Company, all of which were delivered in 1955. The car was lightened with an aluminum cylinder head, the emission of an overdrive, no bumpers or convertible top, a smaller grille and plastic windscreen, as well as a more extensive use of aluminum in the body of the car. In all, shaving off approximately 200 pounds from the car's weight. The car also was the first production car in the world to have disc brakes on both the front and the rear.
As a race car, the car proved itself to be successful, though the most famous example of a 100S in racing was the one driven by Lance Macklin, which was involved in the horrific disaster during the 1955 Le Mans, which sent a Mercedes 300 SLR airborne, with pieces of the car flying into the crowd, killing 83 spectators and injuring 120 more.
Our Austin Healey 100S is an incredibly accurate replica built by Steve Pike of Marsh Classic Restoration in Victoria, Australia. He is the foremost expert on the 100S and has restored more original cars than anyone else, including the Macklin 1955 Le Mans car. Nearly every detail is identical to the originals, both in body and in mechanical configuration.
You make me tremble and shake like an earthquake when you press your lips to mine.
So So personally, I love the style of the Austin Healeys, and they tend to look kind of the same more or less from here all the way through production with updates and expansions, but this is one of the purer forms of these cars. Being a race car doesn't have any frills. It's just a very clean, curvaceous car. Almost everything is a compound curve in one way or the other.
It's true, there are very few flat planes.
I love the way that the headlights flare into the fenders and then it goes down. I love the way that it swoops up and then swoops down through the door and then back up in the back. It's just really a gorgeous shape. It's maybe dated to some extent, but it's a shape that remains beautiful as you go through time. And it's one of the reasons Austin Healeys are still absolutely loved sports cars.
It's also very easy to tell that this is an Austin Healey. Even things that are stylistically perhaps similar, nothing looks exactly like this.
Wow, the bed does stay out my lane when I just do my thing. Worldwide, I got the fame, hustling on the game.
Most of these cars, both the 100 and the 100S, were two-tone, and they were painted in this particular pattern. So when you see something like this go by, even at high speed, it's like, oh, that's an Austin Healey.
Occasionally on later cars, you would have a different shape in the front here, where instead of the line continuing all the way forward, it would curve back by the front tire. But on the early cars, this is pretty much what they did. One of the problems you have with Austin Healeys is because there's a lot of aluminum used, they're also very hard cars to repair and restore very nicely. So you tend to run into problems with things like, for example, the panels here at the front not quite lining up, the fender's slightly longer than the nose, or the grille doesn't quite fit right because it's set in the middle of an aluminum panel. If you're repairing it and things like that, it's very hard to get that grille to fit really nicely. This one fits really, really well.
Unlike our Fiat Abarth double bubble, which was converted for racing, this didn't even come with bumpers. So there was nothing to take off and lose. It just didn't have them. It didn't need them.
Completely superfluous.
Yes, superfluous bumpers.
Yes.
That'd be an excellent band name. Superfluous bumpers.
Break out, I bring the funk, hit like a kick and punch. Good God, I'm feeling good, just like I knew I would.
So the lines of the Austin Healey 100S are very, very similar to that of the base model Austin Healey 100. Most of the body shape is largely the same. The most distinct difference is this grille shape. The original Austin Healey 100 has much more of a kind of trapezoidal grille shape as opposed to the more small oval shape that's on the 100S. So Donald Healey wasn't necessarily certain about the design of the prototype version of the Austin Healey 100 when it premiered at the Motor Show in Earl's Court in 1952. And he originally was having second thoughts about it and turned it so that the front of the car was pointed towards some shrubbery, so you could kind of only see the back and really hid the design itself. And fortunately, he got convinced that that wasn't necessarily what needed to happen, that the design was fine. In fact, it ended up really well received. A lot of people thought it was an Italian design, not necessarily designed by a Brit. It really is an elegant car, very much in sort of that Italian barchetta style that you saw on very early Ferraris and other cars kind of coming out in the early 1950s.
I get it done every day. I get it done, do it my way. What do you think it is?
So one of the things that I love the most about this is the color. This is Old English white over lobelia blue. And this was the color scheme of the vast majority of the Austin Healey 100Ss when they left the factory. Not all of them, but most of them.
Other racing details you'll notice that are more unique to the 100S are things like the leather strap on the bonnet and the louvers actually pressed into the bonnet itself. The leather strap was actually a requirement for a lot of racing organizations at the time. Like, for example, if you wanted to race in Le Mans, you had to have some other means of securing the hood closed. You couldn't just rely on a normal catch of any kind. The windscreen is plexiglass and cut down basically to give enough of a windscreen to basically not have the wind constantly blowing in the driver's face, but at the same time reduce most of the air resistance that a full-on windscreen would have. As a result, there's also absolutely no attempt to make this car weather tight. There's no soft top to fold up, there's no frame for that. You can put a tonneau cover on it, that's the closest you'll get, but if you're driving the car, you can't really close in the whole thing.
The original Austin Healey 100 had a full glass windscreen. However, even that, you could sort of angle it in order to reduce wind resistance also for racing, in case you wanted to use your street car for racing.
They didn't do that on the 100S, however, because it would have been much heavier than just this light piece of plastic.
And this is just bolted on as opposed to having a full frame or anything like that.
Yeah.
This trim piece that almost looks like piping is stainless steel. It comes all the way from the very back, and then it comes down here and all the way down the front to the headlight frames. That's aesthetically pleasing, but it also has a purpose.
Yeah, so on the Austin Healey 100, the shroud here, basically around the hood and everything, was made out of aluminum, while the fenders themselves, the wings, were made out of steel. If you put steel and aluminum next to each other, you risk getting electrolytic corrosion, which would basically eat away at the aluminum and cause it to corrode. By putting a gap between the two, you could basically prevent that direct contact and thus keep that corrosion at bay. In order to cover that gap, they fitted this nice, beautiful stainless steel trim that helps keep it nice and aesthetic and pretty, hides the seam between the two, while at the same time keep the weight down on the car. Now, this being purely a race car, both sides are made out of aluminum. However, it's kind of the same form as what the originals are, and therefore they kept that nice little piece of trim.
So here at the front, we have more aesthetically pleasing shiny bits, one of which is the Austin Healey badge, and that was on all the Austin Healeys. And then down here, you have a badge that part of that would have been on the Austin Healey 100, which is this lightning bolt, and the 100, but it's also got the S, which tells you that you're driving the race model.
The other thing that you'll see down here is we have tow hooks in order to race, and harder to see under here, we have jacking points welded into the frame that were unique to the 100S, intended for race jacks. There's one on each front section of the frame, and then the same thing is repeated in the back. We've got our headlights, we've got little side marker lights here. In this case, they also double as turn signals. And then we have a little piece of plastic trim, essentially, between the fenders at the front here. That serves kind of the same purpose as the stainless steel trim on top. So these headlights are basically the correct headlights for what would have originally been fitted to these cars. It's not a sealed beam, it's not your typical American headlight that you would have at the time. It actually has a replaceable bulb in the back, but it is a Lucas headlight, and it is a Le Mans 24-hour headlight. Essentially the race version that they were using on the cars, and that would have been initially used in like the Le Mans 24-hour race and other things.
Austin Healey's at this time came with wire wheels, both the street level 100 and the 100S. In this case, they're painted body color, which I think is really cool and I find very aesthetically pleasing. I like how it pulls the Old English white across the dark blue down into the lower part of the car. It's just a really nice touch.
They would not have been chrome, actually, at this point. It's not that uncommon to see Austin Healeys with chrome wheels now, but the vast majority would have either been painted silver or been painted like this body color.
And as much as I love chrome, I think it would have been way too much on this car.
Yeah. There's one little piece of chrome, however, that did get carried over from the street car here, which is this little flash on the side. It's on both sides of the car. That you also see on the street version of the Austin Healey. And they kind of continued something very much like it all the way through the production.
And I like that they put it on the race car as well. I mean, it is not functional, but it just looks pretty.
Yeah. And it makes it look like a Healey.
Very true. And as we move toward the back of the car, you'll notice that this line is completely unbroken by anything as gauche as a door handle. I like that aesthetically. It's also aerodynamic. If you want to get in the car, you just reach in and pull it.
Yes, you don't need door handles on a race car, but they didn't put door handles on the base Austin Healey 100 either. If you had your side curtains up because you had your soft top up, you'd have something like a flap that you could open to reach in to open the door. Not necessarily the most secure cars in the world. Back here, we have a few more things that sort of showcase that it's a race car. The biggest, most obvious one is the giant fuel filler here, which does lead to the fuel tank. It's how you would normally fill the car. On the base 100, you actually open the trunk to fill the car. You don't want to necessarily be doing that on a race car, however. The faster you can fill it, the faster you can get back out on the track, especially when you're doing something like a 12-hour or 24-hour race.
So there's a lot of beautiful stylistic details back here. One of the things is how the rear haunches, I guess is what we'll call them, of the car, the curve on those echoes the front fenders in a really lovely way, down to that metal piece of trim. You have your little taillights back here. I like the totally round framing and then with the kind of black rubber seal on there.
And you see almost exactly the same taillight on almost every single British car from really the late 40s all the way through the 1950s. And you even see variants of them on the front of Minis as turn signals and things like that. This taillight design was used absolutely all over the place.
Also back here you have this really lovely handle that's sort of set into this gorgeous piece of trim. And they used that exact handle, Healey used it, from here until the very end of production in 1968.
Yep. So as we said earlier, the back is pretty uncluttered for the most part. No bumpers. I mean, we have a license plate light to have a license plate on here. That way it's a street legal car. But otherwise, strip it down as much as they reasonably could.
The one non-functional thing back here is this really beautiful Austin Healey emblem. I love the curlicues on the lettering back here. It's, again, remember, you're driving an Austin Healey.
As we move into the trunk, you see one of the other big changes between this car and the others, in the fact that it has an absolutely massive 20-gallon fuel tank. Again, if you're racing, this car was built not just to race short races, it was built for 24-hour races, where you'd have multiple drivers driving day and night. So you needed a big fuel tank to not be pulling in and filling it up constantly, especially when you're burning a lot of fuel because you're running at top RPM the entire time. Fuel filler neck, absolutely huge, because you need to fill that giant tank as quickly as possible.
I love the fact that you can also see the back end of the spare tire. There is no wall between this and the driver compartment. It's as open as possible, again, as little weight as possible.
On the street versions of this, the spare tire basically sat in the same place, but it was designed so that you'd remove the spare through the trunk. On this car, you remove the spare from the cockpit. In racing, you may be wondering, why a spare tire in a race car? And a big part of it was that there were certain regulations that also required you to have things like, for example, a passenger seat. You weren't racing with a passenger, but you're required to have a passenger seat. You're required to have a spare tire. You're required to have certain things that cars had in order to be considered a viable race car. You didn't need them to race, but you needed them to add weight and slow you down, keep people from cheating. The other thing you'll notice about this is the trunk's pretty useless. There's a bit of space right here in front of the gas tank, but really not much at all. You might be able to cram 2 cases of wine, but I'm not sure you'd be able to close the trunk lid on it.
Also, this is a race car. You're not carrying things in the trunk.
And if you're racing, you really shouldn't be drinking wine anyway, so do not drink and race. One other thing you'll notice is when we open the trunk, it stays up on its own. It has a really nice sliding hood prop. They probably could have come up with something lighter, but this actually works really well. To close it, you just raise it again, and that's it. And now on to the mechanicals, the beating heart of this Austin Healey 100S.
My energy is my currency.
So this car being a replica, not a genuine as-built 100S, I'm not going to call it a genuine car. That said, it's a very, very accurate replica. Almost everything in this car is as it should be. It has some actual genuine 100S parts in it. It's just not as built by Donald Healey at his factory in Warwick. So opening the hood, there's no other latch that needs to be pulled on the inside. It's just open, put the prop in place. All of this is nice light aluminum, and they did a lot of things to basically make this a very light car. Most of the body's made out of aluminum. In the engine bay, you'll see that a lot of the interior panels that on a stock Healey were welded steel, in this case, are riveted aluminum. A lot of the parts that are reinforcements have lightning holes punched wherever they possibly could. They really wanted to cut as much weight out of this car as possible. And if you think about it, cutting 200 pounds out of this car, basically cuts out the entire weight of a driver. So it's a significant savings in the weight of a car in this era, especially when your cars are less than 2,000 pounds to start with. So looking in the engine bay itself, this engine is the same block as what was in the Austin A90, and basically the same block, more or less, as what was in the Healey 100. However, looking from the top, if you've ever looked in an Austin Healey 100 engine bay, the carburetors are on the opposite side. The exhaust is on the opposite side. The spark plugs are on the opposite side. It kind of looks like the entire thing has been reversed, despite using exactly the same block as a base Austin Healey 100. The stock engine in an Austin Healey 100, or 104 as they're commonly called now, is a 90 horsepower engine. This one is 132, pretty significant increase. When you think in terms of percentage, that's actually quite an increase in performance. So the head on this was designed by Harry Westlake, who was probably one of the most brilliant designers of flow of engines in the 1940s and 50s especially. A lot of the high performance cars of this era, Harry Westlake had a hand in the design of the heads and the way that the combustion chambers were designed in the cylinder head, things like that. This is a replica head of what the originals were, more or less identical to what would have been used on a genuine 100S. So it's a fair comparison for what the original cars are like, even though this is a replica. Mechanically, it's a 4-cylinder engine. It's 2,660 cc's, so pretty good size, but it's a very tall engine. I mean, if you look at sort of how high the top of the valve cover here is, and you look at the fact that it's a very low car, that engine basically takes up all of that space. It does have an oil sump at the bottom. It's not dry sumped, but it's a very, very tall engine. That means it's got a pretty long stroke, and these cars have lots of torque, which makes them fantastic to drive. You've got 2 SU carburetors going through an intake manifold, and our exhaust comes out the same side down here and runs out to the front of the car. So the carburetors all go into this metal airbox here, and then that is attached with a hose to a space up in front of the radiator. So it's fresh, cool air coming in through the front grille that allows us to basically to cool this car. And then we have our brake reservoir here for our brake fluid. It is a push rod engine. All the push rods are on this side of the engine, and our distributor is on this side of the engine. From the carburetors, we've got our fuel bowls here, typical SU carburetor, and these nice copper fuel lines running up and joining up to this hose to a nice heavy fuel line that runs under the car. The one thing you'll notice is that those are actually larger size than what you would typically find on most street Austin Healeys and most street British cars, largely in order to flow more fuel because you're running this thing usually into a fairly small fuel bowl, standard size fuel bowl, at high speed. You're going to be going through that fuel pretty quickly, so you need to be able to replenish it pretty fast, hence the larger diameter lines. It has a fan basically running all the time, just off a belt, essentially, attached to the engine itself, and a little guard here to keep you from running your hand into the engine fan. There is a fresh air intake that comes into the cabin of the car to at least let some fresh air in. It doesn't really necessarily provide much in the way of cooling, and it doesn't go to a heater box or anything, so there is no heater system in this car at all. Considering it's an open car, you're racing it, you're typically not driving it in the cold dead of winter. So it's great for going out in the summer here in Oregon, but it's not the kind of car you would typically spend all day in unless you're really flogging it and racing it. It's not got a lot in the way of creature comforts. So wiring and everything is pretty typically British. The harnesses were made by Lucas, just like pretty much every other British car. We have a voltage regulator that basically controls the generator here that is generating the power to recharge the battery. We have our 2 fuses for 2 circuits because Lucas likes setting cars on fire. However, it's what you saw on almost every British car of this era. And this car has a starter solenoid. One of the things I love about a starter solenoid that Lucas used is that they always put a push button on the end of it, which means when I'm working on the engine, I can push the button and get the engine to turn over. So that's really, really useful when I'm in here trying to figure out, okay, do I have spark? Do I have things going on? I don't have to have someone in there cranking a key over that I can't reach in order to be able to work on the car. Great thing, I wish that more cars had it, although it's probably also a great way to allow you to make it very easy to hotwire your car. However, the security in this car basically is non-existent anyway, so we live with it. Most Austin Healey 100s had a 4-speed transmission, or the very early ones had a 3-speed, which was actually a 4-speed with first gear locked out, and they would have had an overdrive attached to that transmission. The overdrive is a fantastic feature on most British cars, and it made these things fantastic cars to drive on the highway. This car, they got rid of the overdrive because it's a big, heavy lump of metal. And by not putting it in, they're able to keep the weight down quite a bit. However, the engine puts out more power than a stock one, so they were able to change the final drive ratio. And so the final drive ratio on this car gives it pretty long legs. It allows it to basically hit fairly high RPMs without necessarily the need of an overdrive to do that. Instead of the overdrive, we still just have a basic 4-speed transmission, less mechanical parts to go wrong, less things to fail when racing, much lighter weight, yet at the same time, it still has a really good high top speed that makes it competitive on the track. We've got disc brakes, first production car to ever have disc brakes front and rear. The front suspension is done with A-arms. The shock absorbers on this are lever shocks. So instead of having true A-arms on the front, 2 of the arms are essentially the lever shock arm itself. So you've got a valve body that the arm moves in, and as the arm moves up and down, it absorbs and dampens the motion in order to basically keep it balanced. The front springs are coils, rear springs are leaf. So not overly advanced suspension. Most Austin Healeys tend to be a little bit nose heavy. This one actually drives pretty well. The engine is pretty well located. It's located behind the front axle, which helps bring the center of gravity back. It makes the car actually handle quite beautifully. So as I said earlier, the exhaust and the intake on this is sort of backwards from the stock Healey 100. So instead of going down the left side of the car, it goes down the right side, and you can see the exhaust here underneath exiting right behind the driver's side door, keeping it as short and light as possible. And it also means it doesn't have to go anywhere near the rear axle, where it might have to either go up or down below in order to basically give clearance. Thus, you can actually keep a fairly low car and not have to worry about catching your muffler or your exhaust on anything. That's a big problem with a lot of the street Healeys. So and then the last thing to point out here that we have to come around to the front for is visible through the grille, mostly because we have lights underneath the car that actually make it visible. You will see a finned large oil reservoir and oil filter assembly that is also a bit of a cooler mounted right here down low in front of the car. Those are also unique to the 100Ss. So that largely concludes the mechanicals of this car. So let's go ahead and move on to Amy in the interior.
So here we are in the interior. This is the one time this video you will see me in the driver's seat, since I, once again, cannot operate the clutch. This is a very basic interior. This is a race car that has been modified very slightly so that we can take it on the street. So here's the steering wheel, which I love. The steering wheel is correct for this car. The horn is in the correct position. You have your usual gauges. Oil gauge, we have our water and oil temperature, and we have our speedometer, miles per hour. This is the starter button. This is the fuel reserve button. So if you're running low on fuel, you push this and it gets you to the gas station. And then on this side, we have the tachometer, headlight switch, because it did come with headlights. There's your fuel gauge, very important. So down here, we have turn signals. These were added later. Switch over there and over there. And this car did not originally come with turn signals. You don't really need them on the track. So way down here is the choke, which you would pull out to get it started. But I feel like with where the handbrake is, though you would have it down when you're ready to do the choke, it's just kind of weird and wobbly in here, and you have to kind of feel around for where are things. There it is. So where the shift knob is also is awkward because it's on the other side of the tunnel from the driver, and so you're reaching more over and then kind of under the dash like this. That also made it a little difficult for me to drive. Also back here is your handbrake, which is, you know, important for safety reasons. These seats are correct For the Austin Healey 100S, they are leather. They have the ventilation in the back so you don't get too hot when you're racing. It's very important. The rest of the interior is vinyl, rubber mats. There's no carpeting in here. That is way too frou-frou for this car.
Down an uphill battle, wait for it.
Now, behind the driver's seat, while we don't have seatbelts, there are these two rings. And those are where you hook up your 3-point harness so that when you are actually racing, you are safely strapped into the car. On the passenger side, you have a grab handle. There's no seatbelts. You might need that. And this very important plate. This plate tells us that this car is a replica of the Austin Healey 100 Sebring. It says it averaged 132.29 miles per hour for 24 hours and was officially timed by the American Automobile Association at a mean speed of 143.1 miles per hour over the measured mile at Bonneville, Utah, USA, August 1954. And it's then got Donald Healey's signature on there. So that's very important for this car. This, it's basically a certificate of authenticity on there.
Walking in circles all over, but then
Other features of the interior include a rear view mirror, very important. It's Lucas. It's British. These vents do nothing. They were from the body of the Austin Healey, originally a streetcar, but these do nothing. You will also notice that there is no windshield wiper control because there are no windshield wipers. You are lucky in this car that you have a windshield. There is no top. This is not a convertible. This is an open car. No top. There is a tonneau cover that comes out and goes up here and attaches up here so that you can protect your parked car from leaves and rain and things like that, but no top. Just don't take it out in the rain, okay? Just don't do that. Back here you have the spare tire with its own special little leather harness that holds it in here. There's also no glove box, obviously. So if I wanted to put my knitting anywhere, there is this little cubby hole back here, but that could be distracting for the driver if I'm pulling, yarn out from there to over here. They were obviously not thinking about knitting in the race car. It was not in the designer's minds at the time. That's okay. One of the things that I love about the interior is this piece of trim that goes all the way around, across the dashboard, across the doors, and then all the way around the rear. It looks particularly cool on the door. In the door, we have these cutouts. These are very lightweight doors. The whole car is very lightweight. It's very important for racing. We have these really cool little door latches that's how you get out. You just pull that. I love that they're body color. That just makes me happy. They go with this blue. Now, the one thing you do have to be careful about after you open that door is when you swing your legs out. That's the exhaust pipe. That's hot when you're done. So you just have to be very conscious of the fact that that's there so you don't burn your legs. On the road in our beautiful Austin Healey, which I cannot drive because I cannot operate the clutch.
Again, short people problems. No matter how far we put the seat forward, what shoes you're wearing, how many pillows and stuff behind you, just really cannot drive this car.
Nope, and it's very sad.
It's a fairly cool morning. We had some rain last night, and so that's actually dropped the temperature. So if anything, it's maybe a little bit cold right now. But this car thrives in this weather.
It's an English car.
Absolutely. This feels like a very English morning.
Yes.
I've driven a number of Austin Healeys. 104, very late model 3000 BJ. This one definitely is a different beast. It is far more of a race car than it is a street car. There's a lot of compromises they made basically to make it light. The biggest one is the lack of a windscreen.
Yeah.
It basically puts the top edge right about my eye level, and the wind buffeting my eyes and things, even out through my glasses, is pretty miserable. So goggles are almost a necessity driving this car. I mean, it looks cool, it's fun, it's silly, and definitely fits the theme of sort of it being a race car, but at the same time, this car is just a lot of fun. It is very, very responsive. The engine definitely has more power than a stock 104. You feel how much lighter it is. It just really handles better. Austin Healey's tend to be pretty nose heavy. This one actually isn't that bad. It does maybe have a slight bit of understeer, but it has enough power I can throttle that into oversteer. So it allows me to drive it with the gas pedal, which is really what I like having in a race car. The clutch isn't that heavy, it's just a pretty long throw.
Yes.
Hence part of Amy's problem driving this. And this car is really long-legged. So right now, I'm going 60 miles an hour at basically 2,000 RPM. When you consider the fact that I don't have overdrive, yeah, I'm in fourth gear, but this car easily can top out at a fairly high speed without much issue, without that extra weight of the overdrive itself. And a lot of that is it just puts out more power to begin with.
It's interesting. This car is what I would call a thoroughbred race car.
Yes.
It's very elegant in its simplicity.
And it's basically built pretty close to the spec you would have actually taken it on the track with.
Mm-hmm.
I have not driven this car on a track. I think it would be a lot of fun. Someday I may take it out, do some laps or something at like Portland International Raceway or something. It's not a race car in the modern sense of what I can race in vintage racing without modifying it further. I need to put in like a full roll cage and things like that, and I really don't want to do that to this car.
Also, seat belts.
Yeah, seat belts would be good.
It doesn't have seat belts.
And that's something I'll probably end up putting in this in the long run. The suspension is fairly stiff. It's definitely stiffer than a stock Healey. You do feel that on bumpier sections of road.
Yep.
And at the same time, this car is pretty civilized. It's fairly easy for us to drive it in these kind of conditions.
Yeah. I mean, it is happy on the track, off the track. It'll get you where you need to go and perform beautifully while it does that. But it's definitely not a take it to the grocery store,
Yeah.
daily
Like, okay,
driving
we have
kind
a
of
trunk,
car.
but most of the trunk's a fuel tank.
Yeah.
So, 20 gallons of fuel will get us quite a ways, but
My handbag fits, but that's
Yeah.
about it.
frankly, other than the wind and the wind noise, it's a really comfortable car to drive. I don't mind the driving position. I'm a little bit cramped up. That seems to be common on British cars this era, with my arms pretty close to my chest.
I love the bucket seats.
Yeah,
They mean that I don't move around.
the seats are great, and then they're ventilated to the back, so you don't get sweaty, even in high temperatures racing this thing. So it at least allows some air flow through the seat. So the exhaust is pretty loud. Being a side exit, it's basically right by my right ear. Almost exactly next to me. So it's hard to carry on a conversation.
Yes, this is not a road trip car.
Nope.
Oh, this would be miserable on the freeway.
Yeah.
But it is fun out here on these kind of winding roads. Even as a passenger, I'm having a great time.
One of the other things with this car is it's got a side shift transmission that's biased to the passenger side of the car, to the left, I should say. And you kind of have to find the gear stick. It's there somewhere under the dash when it's in the forward positions. So driving, there's a lot of okay, where is it? It's not too bad, but
I think once you get used to this is where it is, you spatially will reach for it more. I really struggled with that when I was trying to drive this car on top of the clutch thing.
Yeah. But when I get on it, this car just goes. Runs beautifully. And it feels very stable, even at speed.
It's the most amazing sound. I just really love that sound.
So honestly, for a car from the 1950s, this drives pretty well.
Yeah, it does.
I mean, this car is, 5 years newer than our MGTC was? Well, 8 years beyond the MGTC.
And it's so much better.
And it is a much, much better car.
Hey girl, do I have to spell it out? I'm in love with you. Hey girl,
I really wish you could drive this car. I think you would absolutely love it.
Yeah.
It's not practical. Not
No.
practical at all.
No.
But it's a lot of fun. Okay, we're back in the studio after an exhilarating drive. I think I can still hear. So let's go ahead and kick off with the Haugland Score. Here's how it works.
Alex and I have individually rated the car in 5 categories, each with a rank of 0 to 10. Then we add our scores together to give us the final Haugland score.
After we combine our scores, the results go up on the board.
So our first category is performance, and I gave it an 8 because it accelerates beautifully, it makes a wonderful noise. You made driving it look absolutely effortless. So, yeah.
I also gave it an 8, actually. And it's kind of hard. I mean, I keep thinking back to some of the other scores that I've given on like Lamborghini Espada getting a 9. This is nowhere near as fast as an Espada, but for its time and the era of what type of car it really is a great performing car. Our next category is style. And style is one of the things that I love about the Austin Healey. It is a beautiful car. I gave it a 9.
And I gave it an 8 for similar reasons. It is a very distinctive car. It's classy and very elegant and understated.
And that actually is something I really like about it, is that it is a car that has beautiful shape, beautiful form, but it isn't overly adorned with chrome. It doesn't have lots of features that are unnecessary. It's just really clean and pretty.
So our next category is drivability. And unfortunately, I had to give this car a 0 because I cannot physically drive it.
I mean, even with me, I basically am fully extending my foot to push the clutch to the floor in a position that I'm fairly comfortable in, so I can fully understand that. And drivability is its kind of failure for me too. And a big part of that is because of what it is. It's a race car.
Yep.
I gave it a 3. It's not a car I can drive every day. It's not a car I can park absolutely anywhere. It has no weather equipment whatsoever. So if you get caught in a rainstorm, you're in the rainstorm. Tough luck.
And you can't get groceries in it.
Yeah, there's some room in the trunk, but it's really more about fitting a giant gas tank. Our next category is significance. And this is one that's kind of hard to do on this car. If this were a genuine Healey with race history, if this had been a car that had raced in Le Mans, no question, we'd be at 10. As it's a replica, even though it's a very accurate replica, I'm going to end up giving it a 7. A lot of that is because it's a replica. From the collection point of view and from the historical point of view, we mostly collect original, correct cars, and this is a very good replica, but it's still a replica.
So I also gave this a 7. It represents the racing history. It represents that era of Austin Healey's development. It's still a very accurate replica. And so for our collection, it's still a significant car because we also don't have anything quite like it. And also the fact that Steve Pike built this car adds a lot to its significance. So our last category is delight. I gave it a 7. It was really fun to ride in. It was really fun to be in. We do get some positive attention on the road. However, I was incredibly sad that I couldn't drive it. So that offset the delight somewhat. And it didn't get quite as much attention as some of our other cars do.
And I gave it a 9. And most of that for me is the pure visceral driving experience. You've got the wind blowing through your hair. You've got sort of the joy of it. It's a very fun car to drive. And so I fully understand you giving it a lower score since you didn't get to experience that.
No.
But for me, that's why I'm willing to give this car a 9. It is a delightful car to drive.
I can totally understand that.
Other people, we're mostly going down roads where it's like people are seeing it passing and they don't necessarily realize what's special about it. At the same time, most people are still looking over their shoulder at this car as it passes them. And you can pass them in it.
That is true.
So, after doing the math, that gives us a final score of 66 for our 1955 Austin Healey 100S replica.
That puts it in 14th place, just 1 point below our 1976 Ferrari 308 GTB.
So, I think the biggest failings for this car in a lot of ways are the fact that it is a race car. That doesn't make it not a special car. That does not make it an enjoyable car to drive. And the fact that you physically couldn't drive it, I think, hurt it a lot, which is kind of sad because it really is a wonderful car. I wish that you'd been able to drive it.
And I felt so disappointed that I had to miss out on that car, especially when I saw the smile on your face while you were driving it.
Yeah, I mean, no matter how tall your shoes are, how many pillows we stuck behind your back, it just really wasn't going to work, sadly. You're just too short.
I'm too short. Short people problems.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of Everyday to Exotic. Like, subscribe, tell your friends. Let us know what you think of this car. Should we do more reviews of things that are replicas? Should we have handled this differently?
We really appreciate all of your comments, and we do try to respond to all of them.
There's some great stories that we've gotten on some of the cars that we've had. Please continue to share them. It's absolutely wonderful.
Okay, we'll see you next episode. Bye.
Bye.
What's the young Frankenstein? The Frau, what's her name?
Frau.